Some people think power is measured by what you take, not what you protect. The words echoed in my mind as I pushed open the heavy front door of the Blackwood Estate, my worn shoes squeaking faintly against the polished hardwood. The clock on the wall glowed 11:57 p.m., and the mansion was nearly silent, except for the faint hum of the refrigerator and the distant ticking of the grandfather clock in the foyer. I adjusted my apron, tugging it tight around my waist, and tried not to think about the 3 hours of cleaning, dusting, and laundry that had left my arms sore and my back aching. My name is Mia Thompson, 23, and I have spent the past year juggling college, part-time shifts at diners, and the occasional house cleaning job just to keep the lights on. Tonight was supposed to be a simple maid shift, yet the moment I stepped into the foyer, I sensed the air change. The chandelier above flickered as if reacting to my presence, casting long shadows across the marble floors. From the corner of my eye, I saw movement, footsteps echoing softly against the walls. Damian Black, the man whose name alone had set the city's elite on edge, appeared at the top of the staircase. He was tall, nearly 6'2", dressed in a perfectly tailored black suit that seemed to absorb the dim light, his eyes sharp, the color of storm clouds just before a downpour. His gaze swept the room with precision, and when it landed on me, I felt an odd mixture of fear and fascination, as if my every thought had been laid bare. He was silent, yet the aura of authority emanating from him made the walls themselves seem to lean closer, listening. I swallowed hard, gripping the handle of the vacuum cleaner like a lifeline, and reminded myself that I was just here to do my job. Then came the faintest sound of a baby's laugh from the nursery at the end of the hall. The sound was small, fragile, yet it carried weight, breaking through the tension in the room like sunlight through storm clouds. I instinctively moved toward the sound, careful with each step, aware that Damian's eyes never left me. The nursery door was ajar, and I peered in just enough to see little Ethan playing with a simple wooden toy, the faintest curl of hair brushing his forehead, his small hands grasping the blocks with concentration. My heart softened despite the exhaustion, and I stepped fully into the room, crouching to place a soft blanket beneath him, careful not to disturb his play. Damian's presence was felt rather than seen, the air around me thick with quiet judgment and an unspoken understanding of power and protection. I whispered softly to Ethan, encouraging him to reach for a block, and he looked up with wide, trusting eyes that made my chest ache in a way I hadn't expected. Damian shifted slightly behind me, a subtle reminder of his watchful stance. Yet there was no threat in the gesture, only calculation. I realized then that this was more than a simple job. This was a moment where choice and chance intersected, where the smallest act of care could ripple into something far greater. As Ethan reached for the next block, and I steadied him gently, I felt a surge of resolve. I would do whatever it took to protect him, even in silence, even under the gaze of a man who had fired 10 others before me. And as Damian's eyes met mine across the room, there was a flicker, a pause, the slightest acknowledgement that perhaps even the most powerful cannot resist the truth of innocence and genuine care. The moment stretched, heavy with possibility, and I knew instinctively that nothing about tonight would be ordinary, and that choices made in these quiet seconds would echo far beyond the walls of this grand, silent mansion. The soft glow of the night lights reflected off the polished wood floors as I moved silently through the hallway, each step calculated so as not to startle little Ethan. I could hear the faint ticking of the grandfather clock, its steady rhythm grounding me in the quiet of the mansion, while Damian remained at a distance, watching with an intensity that made the air feel thick and alive. I adjusted the blanket around Ethan, ensuring that his small fingers did not brush against the edge of the wooden toy he had been reaching for moments ago. There was a tension in the room, a silent understanding that even the smallest actions mattered here, that each choice could ripple outward beyond the walls. Damian stepped slightly closer, his polished shoes making no more than a whisper against the marble, and I caught the faint scent of his cologne, crisp and sharp, yet somehow softened by the warmth of the night. His eyes never left me, scanning for intent, for the subtleties that could reveal weakness or strength. Yet there was a quiet acknowledgement in his stance that I had passed some invisible test, that my care for Ethan had not gone unnoticed. I straightened, taking a deep breath, and lifted the toy gently to hand it to Ethan, who accepted it with a delighted giggle, his eyes bright in the soft light. Damian's lips curved, imperceptibly, a shadow of an expression that suggested approval rather than reprimand. The faint hum of the air conditioning mingled with the quiet shuffling of my steps as I moved toward the small kitchen at the far end of the hall to prepare a warm bottle for Ethan, Damian following silently but closely behind, his presence both comforting and commanding. I poured the milk carefully, the sound of liquid filling the bottle soft yet distinct in the stillness, and felt Ethan's small hands reach out to steady it, his trust implicit. I caught a flicker of Damian's gaze as he observed, noting the meticulous care with which I handled the simple task, the patience in my movements, and the unspoken dedication in my posture. I handed the bottle to Ethan, and as he began to sip, I allowed myself a brief exhale, the tension in my shoulders easing just slightly, though the awareness of Damian's watchful presence never faded. He stepped closer still, a silent sentinel, and I could feel the weight of his attention, heavy but not oppressive, a subtle acknowledgement of the bond forming in the quiet moments of care. The grandfather clock ticked on, marking each second as I guided Ethan to a small rocking chair, his little feet dangling above the floor as he rocked gently, humming a soft tune I had picked up from my mother years ago. Damian stood behind, his shadow stretching across the room. Yet there was no malice, only a sense of gravity, of presence that demanded respect and focus. I straightened the blanket around Ethan once more and tucked a stray curl behind his ear, and in that brief suspended moment, I realized that the night, the mansion, the power and wealth surrounding us, all of it had fallen away to this single fragile interaction between care, trust, and silent understanding. Damian's gaze softened imperceptibly, just enough that I felt the faintest relief, a recognition that he understood the value of the simple act, the quiet protection, and the significance of being chosen not for obedience, but for the ability to nurture. The room held its breath as Ethan settled into the rocking chair, and I felt the unspoken promise in the air, that some things, even in a world defined by power and control, could be safeguarded by the gentlest hands, and that trust, once earned, held a weight greater than any authority or command. The soft hum of the air conditioning filled the room as I carried the empty bottle back to the small kitchenette, my movements careful and deliberate. Damian remained just behind the doorway, silent but present, a subtle pressure that made me acutely aware of every step, every breath I took. The moonlight filtering through the tall windows cast long shadows across the polished floors, and the quiet tick of the grandfather clock seemed to echo with significance, marking the passing of each second in the mansions that never truly slept. I filled the sink with warm water, the gentle clink of the dishes against the porcelain breaking the stillness in a way that was both grounding and comforting, and I caught a fleeting glance at Damian from the corner of my eye. He stood rigid, yet there was a softness to the way he observed, a patience that contrasted with the aura of authority he naturally carried. Ethan hummed a gentle tune from his rocking chair, the sound light and pure, and it pulled at something deep inside me, a reminder of why I was here beyond any paycheck, beyond the polish of the mansion or the weight of responsibility. I prepared a small plate with a few soft crackers, arranging them with precision, and then returned to the nursery, kneeling beside Ethan as he reached eagerly for the snack. Damian stepped closer again, his polished shoes silent against the wood, and I felt the subtle shift in energy, the quiet approval that passed between us without words. I guided Ethan's small hands toward the crackers, his green eyes sparkling with delight, and I allowed myself a small private smile, savoring the trust and innocence in that simple gesture. Damian's gaze softened imperceptibly as he leaned against the doorframe, arms crossed, watching the interaction with an intensity that was oddly reassuring. A silent acknowledgement that this was not merely a task, but a moment of genuine care and connection. The faint aroma of the lavender candles I had lit earlier mingled with the warm scent of the night air drifting through the open windows, grounding the room in a quiet serenity that felt almost fragile, as if it could be shattered by the slightest misstep. I straightened the blanket around Ethan once more, tucking the edges carefully so that he was comfortable, and felt a subtle warmth spread through me at the sight of his contented expression. Damian shifted slightly, a soft exhale that was almost inaudible, yet it carried the weight of understanding and respect. a silent promise that he recognized the importance of my presence here. I settled into a chair near the rocking chair, allowing Ethan to nibble at his crackers while I watched, my eyes occasionally flicking to Damian, who remained an ever-present figure at the doorway, the quiet sentinel overseeing the room. The clock ticked on, each second a gentle reminder that time moved forward, and within that forward motion, a subtle bond was forming, delicate yet undeniable. I reached out to straighten Ethan's hair again, my fingers brushing against the soft strands, and the baby's giggle filled the room, a sound so light and pure that even Damian's stern expression seemed to soften imperceptibly. In that moment, the mansion, with all its grandeur and silent corridors, felt alive with connection, a world where trust, care, and quiet courage held more weight than the grandeur outside. I realized then that this night, these moments, were shaping something far greater than a simple employment or duty. They were forming the foundation of a bond built on protection, understanding, and the gentle power of being chosen, not because of wealth or authority, but because of the ability to nurture and safeguard what truly mattered. The mansion felt even quieter now, the night deepening into a velvet stillness that wrapped around every corner, every ornate piece of furniture, and every polished floor. I watched Ethan rocking gently, his small hands curling around the soft blanket, his eyes heavy with sleep yet bright with trust. Damian lingered by the doorway, his posture relaxed but attentive, the faint glint of the moonlight on his tailored suit accentuating the quiet authority he carried without effort. I straightened the blanket one last time, ensuring it covered Ethan's little shoulders, and the soft rustle of the fabric seemed magnified in the silence. My fingers lingered on the edge of the chair as I leaned forward slightly, catching a glimpse of Damian's profile in the soft light, the sharp line of his jaw softened by the subtle arch of his brow as he watched over the room. I took a slow breath, trying to internalize the calm that contrasted with the tension of the earlier hours, the sense of responsibility settling around me like a tangible weight. Damian stepped a half-pace closer, his presence noticeable yet unobtrusive, and I felt the room shift subtly with the quiet energy between us, a silent acknowledgement that the bond forming was delicate yet undeniable. Ethan yawned softly, stretching his little arms, and I guided him gently back against the chair, careful to maintain the support of the blanket, my eyes flicking toward Damian, who observed each movement with a steady, measured patience that was almost tangible. I whispered softly to Ethan, encouraging him to rest, and he leaned into the blanket with a contented sigh, trusting completely. Damian's gaze softened, an imperceptible nod of approval passing between us without a single word spoken, the quiet communication of two people bound by care and responsibility. The faint tick of the grandfather clock filled the spaces between us, a rhythm that seemed to mark the passing of both time and awareness, each second laden with quiet significance. I adjusted a pillow beneath Ethan's head, making certain that his small body was supported comfortably, and the warmth of the room, mingled with the soft scent of the lavenders, created an environment that felt safe, protected, and intimate in a way that was calming without needing words. Damian shifted slightly, leaning against the doorframe with hands loosely crossed, the faintest trace of a smile tugging at the corner of his lips as he observed the care and precision in my movements. I felt the gentle weight of the trust in the room, a quiet understanding that the small acts of attention, the meticulous tending to Ethan's needs, were recognized and valued. The silence held a certain gravity, an unspoken acknowledgement of mutual respect and awareness, where the magnitude of protection and empathy was measured not by words, but by presence and action. I sat back slightly, observing Ethan's calm breathing as his eyes finally closed, and allowed myself a brief moment to exhale, the tension of the night settling slowly into a steady calm. Damian's presence remained constant, a sentinel without intrusion, and I felt the subtle reassurance in knowing that this shared vigilance, this careful attention to the well-being of someone so small and precious, was shaping a connection grounded in care, trust, and unspoken understanding. The mansion, vast and silent, seemed to breathe along with us, every shadow softened by the moonlight, every surface reflecting a quiet harmony that held the promise of protection, empathy, and the quiet strength of being chosen not by obligation, but by the bond of genuine care. The soft glow of the moonlight shifted through the tall windows, as I quietly gathered the few toys Ethan had left scattered across the nursery floor, stacking them neatly on the shelf while listening to the faint creak of the mansion settling in the night. Damian stood near the doorway, his tall frame steady and composed, observing without intrusion, his piercing eyes following my every motion with a calm intensity that seemed to anchor the room. I adjusted the blanket around Ethan once more, smoothing the folds carefully so that he was comfortable and secure, and the faint sound of his breathing settled into a steady rhythm that filled the space with a gentle calm. I took a slow breath, allowing the quiet of the mansion to wash over me, the polished floors reflecting the moonlight in long streaks that danced subtly with the shadows cast by the furniture. Damian shifted slightly, the soft click of his shoes against the hardwood barely audible, and I felt the subtle presence of his watchfulness, a protective energy that required no words yet carried undeniable weight. I reached down to straighten Ethan's tiny pajama sleeves, his small hands curling around mine briefly before releasing with a relaxed sigh, and the softness of that moment settled deep within me, a reminder of why every careful action mattered in this quiet space. Damian's gaze softened just enough that I felt a flicker of reassurance, the acknowledgement that the care I took was seen and valued, and that the bond forming through these small, deliberate gestures was stronger than the grandeur and authority surrounding us. I set the last toy in place and stepped back, allowing myself to observe Ethan as he shifted slightly in his chair, curling comfortably against the blanket, the gentle rise and fall of his chest marking the peacefulness of the moment. Damian's shoulders relaxed fractionally, and I sensed the weight of his presence shift from evaluation to quiet appreciation, the kind that did not require words but spoke volumes through attention and understanding. The grandfather clock ticked on in the background, each second reinforcing the rhythm of the night, a subtle companion to the soft creaks and hums that filled the mansion with life. I crouched briefly to brush a stray curl from Ethan's forehead, his sleepy green eyes glancing up at me with a trust that felt profound in its simplicity. And I felt a quiet warmth spread through me, knowing that in this small, delicate moment, care and protection were the strongest forces in the room. Damian stepped closer, his shadow stretching across the floor but without imposing, a silent partnership in ensuring the comfort and safety of this small life. I straightened again, taking in the room as a whole, noting the calm, the trust, and the quiet connection that had formed, a bond that was fragile yet resilient, built not on words or authority, but on attentiveness, empathy, and the shared understanding of responsibility. The air seemed to hum softly with the weight of these unspoken truths, and I felt a sense of peace that was rare, a quiet recognition that what we were building in these hours of gentle care and watchfulness would leave a lasting impression far beyond the walls of this silent, moonlit mansion. The first rays of early morning crept through the tall windows, painting the polished hardwood floors with streaks of pale gold as I moved quietly through the nursery, careful not to disturb the still sleeping Ethan. The faint scent of lavender from the candles mingled with the cool morning air, creating a gentle calm that contrasted with the tension of the previous night. Damian remained by the doorway, his figure a quiet sentinel, arms loosely crossed, eyes alert yet calm, the aura of authority softened by the warmth of the room. I adjusted the blanket around Ethan once more, tucking it neatly so that he remained comfortable, his small chest rising and falling steadily with each deep breath. I straightened the few toys he had left scattered across the floor, arranging them carefully on the shelf, and the subtle click of the blocks and the rustle of fabric echoed lightly in the room. Damian shifted slightly, the faint sound of his polished shoes on the floor almost imperceptible, yet it reminded me that he was ever present, watching with a measured attention that was firm without being imposing. I knelt beside Ethan, brushing a stray curl from his forehead, and he stirred slightly, mumbling a soft, contented sound before settling again. The grandfather clock ticked steadily in the background, a rhythm that seemed to anchor the room in quiet reassurance. I poured a small glass of water from the kitchen into a cup for myself, the soft clink of ceramic sounding loud in the stillness, and I paused for a moment to observe Damian, whose gaze remained steady, assessing and acknowledging the care I took with a subtle nod. I guided Ethan's little hands to his favorite soft toy, the plush bear slightly worn from nightly cuddles, and he held it with a gentle grip, his trust evident in the way he relaxed against the blanket. Damian stepped slightly closer, his presence firm but unobtrusive, and I felt the unspoken communication between us, a recognition of shared responsibility and care that did not require words. The soft glow of the moonlight reflected on his tailored suit, accentuating the quiet strength and patience that seemed to radiate from him effortlessly. I straightened my back, adjusting the blanket one last time, and noticed a flicker of acknowledgement in Damian's eyes, an imperceptible expression that communicated approval and quiet gratitude for the diligence and tenderness I had shown. Ethan stirred again, stretching his tiny arms above his head, and I moved to soothe him with a gentle touch, the warmth of our interaction filling the room with a sense of calm and connection. Damian remained at the doorway, silent and vigilant, his watchfulness a reassuring presence that emphasized the weight and importance of these quiet, intimate moments. I took a slow, deliberate breath, feeling the subtle strength of the bond forming in this early hour, a connection built on care, attentiveness, and the trust placed in me by both the child and the man who watched over us. The mansion itself seemed to breathe with the quiet rhythm of the morning, each shadow softened by the gentle light, each surface reflecting the shared calm and careful attention that defined these moments. A reminder that protection, trust, and empathy carried far more power than words or commands ever could. The soft morning light stretched across the nursery, brushing the walls with a pale gold that made every corner of the room feel warm and alive. Ethan stirred in his little rocking chair, blinking sleepily as his small hands clutched the plush bear tightly, and I moved closer to gently adjust his blanket, careful not to disturb the fragile calm we had nurtured through the night. Damian remained near the doorway, his tall frame still and composed, eyes attentive yet calm, observing every careful motion I made with a quiet intensity that was impossible to ignore. The air was filled with the faint scent of lavender and the subtle warmth of the early sun, casting long, soft shadows on the polished hardwood floors, and I could feel the delicate tension in the room ease just slightly under the presence of these comforting details. I leaned down, softly speaking to Ethan to encourage him to stretch his little arms and wiggle his fingers, and he responded with a faint, contented smile, the kind of smile that carried trust and innocence in equal measure. Damian's gaze softened, the imperceptible change a signal that the small, deliberate acts of care were not only noticed but respected, a silent acknowledgement of the bond forming through patience, attention, and empathy. I reached for a small toy car that had rolled under the rocking chair, handing it to Ethan, who grasped it immediately, his eyes bright with delight, and the simple joy in his expression seemed to illuminate the room further, creating an invisible bridge of warmth between us. Damian stepped slightly closer, yet never intruded, his presence a steadying force, a quiet strength that balanced authority with subtle encouragement, and I felt the weight of that watchful attention as a reminder that protection could be quiet, measured, and profoundly reassuring. The faint ticking of the grandfather clock in the background marked each second deliberately, echoing through the mansion in soft, comforting rhythm, and I allowed myself a brief moment to observe the harmony of the scene, the gentle trust of a child, the care I offered, and the silent acknowledgement from Damian. I guided Ethan's hands gently along the toy, demonstrating the simple mechanics of movement, and he laughed softly, a sound that resonated with the faint chirping of morning birds outside the windows, blending into the quiet serenity of the mansion. Damian's shoulders relaxed fractionally, a subtle sign that he recognized the significance of these small, tender moments, and I felt the connection deepen, a bond formed not through words or commands, but through presence, trust, and the shared understanding of responsibility. I straightened, smoothing the blanket one last time around Ethan, and brushing a strand of hair from his forehead, and the gentle motion was mirrored by Damian's watchful gaze, a recognition of care and attention that needed no words. The room seemed to hold its breath in the warmth of the early day, the polished floors reflecting the sunlight and shadows in gentle patterns, and I felt a quiet confidence that the trust and connection established here would resonate far beyond the quiet walls, shaping the bond between a child, a caregiver, and the silent sentinel whose attention and respect provided a profound sense of protection and reassurance in the calm, golden morning. The morning sunlight had grown stronger, spilling through the tall windows and bathing the nursery in warm golden light that made every corner shimmer softly. Ethan had finally fallen into a deep, contented sleep, his small chest rising and falling evenly. And I remained close, kneeling beside the rocking chair to make sure the blanket was tucked properly around his tiny body. Damian stood near the doorway, his posture relaxed yet commanding, eyes calm and observant, his presence filling the room with a quiet authority that felt protective rather than imposing. I adjusted the few scattered toys on the floor, lining them neatly along the shelf, and the subtle clinking of the blocks against each other seemed amplified in the gentle stillness, marking the care and attentiveness that defined every moment in the room. I ran my hand along the edge of the rocking chair, smoothing the fabric and checking the blanket one last time, and the soft warmth of the early sun made the polished wood glow faintly, reflecting the calm that had settled over the mansion. Damian shifted slightly, the faint sound of his polished shoes on the hardwood floor, almost imperceptible, yet the quiet rhythm of his movement seemed to punctuate the stillness, a reminder of the steady presence that had become both reassuring and grounding. I glanced at Ethan, his small hands curled around the plush bear, and a quiet smile tugged at my lips as I observed the ease of his breathing, the trust in his relaxed expression, and the serene environment we had created together. Damian's eyes followed each subtle movement I made, the soft approval evident in the gentle narrowing of his eyes, and the atmosphere in the room felt like a delicate dance of care, respect, and silent communication. I straightened the blanket around Ethan again, making sure it was snug but comfortable, and I allowed myself a slow, deliberate breath, feeling the weight of responsibility and the quiet pride that came from ensuring his safety and comfort. Damian's presence remained constant, a sentinel whose attention never intruded, and I could feel the unspoken bond that had formed through these moments of trust, patience, and shared understanding. The grandfather clock ticked softly in the background, its rhythmic sound blending with the faint hum of the mansion settling into the day, and the combination created a quiet cadence that underscored the significance of the care being given. I leaned down slightly, brushing a soft curl from Ethan's forehead, and he murmured softly in his sleep, a sound so delicate that it made the room feel alive with gentle energy. Damian stepped a fraction closer, the shift almost imperceptible, and I sensed the acknowledgement in his posture that the small actions of attentiveness and empathy were valued, recognized, and protected. I allowed myself a brief moment to observe the room as a whole, noting the sunlight on the polished floors, the calm of the sleeping child, and the quiet presence of the man who had chosen to stand watch over us. The mansion, vast and filled with silent spaces, seemed to contract around the small sphere of care we had created, emphasizing the importance of attention, trust, and the gentle power of being present. Every detail, the arrangement of toys, the softness of the blanket, the warmth of the sunlight, and the careful watchfulness of Damian, wove together into a tapestry of protection and empathy, a moment that would resonate far beyond the quiet golden morning. The mansion had grown still, the golden morning light stretching across the polished floors, casting long, soft reflections that seemed to dance gently along the walls. Ethan remained curled in his small rocking chair, eyes closed in deep sleep. The plush bear clutched tightly in his tiny hands, and I remained beside him, kneeling to ensure the blanket remained snug and comfortable. Damian stood just inside the doorway, the height of his presence both commanding and calm, his eyes observing every careful motion I made with a quiet intensity that spoke of awareness and protection. The faint hum of the air conditioning mingled with the distant ticking of the grandfather clock, creating a rhythm that was both grounding and subtly affirming, marking the passage of time with quiet steadiness. I straightened the small stack of toys on the shelf once more, aligning them neatly and adjusting the spacing with precision, and the soft clink of one toy against another resonated faintly in the room, highlighting the attentive care with which I moved. Damian shifted slightly, a subtle, almost imperceptible motion that made me aware of the measured attention he maintained, present but unobtrusive, and I felt a strange reassurance in the balance of authority and quiet trust. I leaned down, brushing a stray curl from Ethan's forehead, and he murmured softly in his sleep, a tiny contented sound that seemed to make the room pulse gently with life, a delicate reminder of the trust and comfort we had nurtured through these quiet hours. Damian stepped another fraction closer, the polished wood reflecting the soft morning light, and I sensed the silent acknowledgement in his posture that my care was appreciated, recognized, and quietly respected. I allowed myself a slow, deliberate breath, the weight of responsibility, and the subtle pride of tending to something so small and precious settling into my chest as a gentle warmth. Ethan shifted slightly, stretching his tiny arms before curling back into the blanket, and I guided him gently, ensuring his comfort without disturbing the soft rhythm of his breathing. The room felt alive with quiet connection, the polished floors, the sunlight, the soft scent of lavender, and the silent presence of Damian combining into a delicate harmony of care, trust, and mutual awareness. I adjusted the blanket one final time and stepped back slightly, taking in the room as a whole. The calm of the sleeping child, the alignment of every toy, the faint shadows stretching along the walls, and Damian's unwavering presence at the doorway, a steady sentinel and witness to the bond that had formed. The mansion itself seemed to breathe in unison with us, each detail, the warmth of the sun, the careful motions, the attentive watchfulness, blending into a moment that felt suspended yet profound, a quiet affirmation that the connection built on care, empathy, and trust had created something lasting and significant, a gentle promise of protection and understanding that would endure far beyond till golden morning.